Are you ready to make your own little StarKeeper? Well, before we jump in, let's first talk about some of the supplies that we need before we start. The very first thing that we're going to need is to cut out our paper template pattern pieces. So when you have that ready, make sure you have some felt. I have a gold color here. This was originally yellow, but I gave it a tea bath. In the pattern, I've given you instructions if you would like to do the same. I also did the same thing to my cotton velour. For this, you just need some scraps. Then I have a piece of doll skin fabric. This is just a small piece of doll skin fabric. I really don't need that much of it. I just need to make sure that I can fold it in half and I have enough room to place my pattern piece on top of it with a little bit of room to spare. I also need sewing thread. I've picked this color because it matches my doll skin fabric. And I will need embroidery thread. This matches both my star and my cotton velour over here. This is the color that I'll be using for the mouth, and this will be the color for the eyes. I will need pens and sewing needles, scissors. I have an erasable pen here that I use to mark eyes on my dolls. If you don't have one of these, a simple grey lead pencil used very lightly will do the same thing. I also have a small amount, about a handful of wool roving. I don't need much, and just to show you, this is the only part of our little StarKeeper that will use stuffing. So if you can scrunch it up and still have enough that you think is going to be just a little bit extra than that, then you're probably good. I also have two different color yarns here. You don't need two, you need two strands. I like to use two different colors because I just like the look of that, but you could use simply one color, just make sure you have two strands of it. Okay, now we've done that, let's get going. The first thing that we need to do in our pattern is to make sure our little pieces have all been cut out from the paper because we need to pin those on to our felt now. So let's position them in a way that we're trying to minimize the waste felt. I'm going to use close to the edge as I can before I just pin it here. And then we simply cut out. We need two of these pieces. So once I've cut this one out, I'll go ahead and cut another. I'm going to put away that felt. Maybe it'll come in handy for a future project. And my second star. Now that my second star is done, I need to cut this little hole here. So I could use my snips or I could use a craft knife. I'm going to try with my snips first. First, I'm just going to cut a little hole to get through the felt. There we go. And now I'm going to use that to work straight along the line that is indicated on the paper, making sure all of the fibers of the felt have been cut through. Okay, if you have a craft knife, you might like to use that instead, but I find that that works just as well. If you have any little jagged edges, you may want to just gently tidy those up. Not too much because we don't want that to be huge. And just very gently going to cut a slight slither from that bottom piece to give it a little bit more of an opening. When you do this, you want to make sure that it's even. The edges are the same distance from the corners of the star here. I think that's pretty good. So now I have my two star pieces. I'm going to take my embroidery thread, which I forgot to mention we needed. So hopefully I put a little note when I was discussing what we needed for this pattern. So now I'm going to make some little embroidery stars just on this front piece. The back doesn't need any unless you want to put them. My little star friend here only has them on the front, not the back. So we're going to take our embroidery thread. If your embroidery thread is like mine, it's quite thick, but I only want to use 2 of these strands. So I'm going to separate these 2 from the other 4. And to do this, I just very gently pull them apart. So I have separated my embroidery thread and attached it to my needle. I'm about to position the knot on the inside of my felt. I mentioned that because sometimes if you purchase a piece of hand-dyed felt, there are some variations of color and you may wish to highlight this. So you may have a front and an inside. So make sure this embroidery thread attaches on the inside. So to do that, I've just worked it through a little piece of felt here. You can see it's not visible on the outside, just the inside. I'm doing that just so I can create a little knot, and those ends are going to be tucked in on the inside in a moment. So let's create this knot here. You can tell I've got my finger just here so I don't pull that through, because I can't tell you how many times I've done that before. Now I'm just going to cut that. So now this is attached just here. I'm going to make a star, which is very easy. So from the other side, turn it over, and the stars are made by either making 3 or 4 straight stitches that cross over each other. So here I have 1 stitch. Now let's make a 2nd stitch and a 3rd stitch. So this is what the star looks like if it's just with 3 stitches, but I generally like to make them with 4 stitches. So I'll go ahead and make that one as well. Maybe. And that's what the star looks like with 4 stitches. So now I don't need to tie a knot here, but I do need to move the thread, and I need to be careful not to cross it over this opening. So I'm going to try to work it around. So let's put a little star right here at the edge of our little opening. Maybe here I'll just make a tiny little 3 stitch star. So there's my little 3 stitch star, and I have moved the thread going around this opening. I don't want my string to go across it, because that means the little baby will have trouble getting back into the star later. So on the front we can decide where we want our next star to sit, and just gently move the thread to the position where you want it. Don't pull it too tight, our little star will warp. Okay, I'm looking at that star and I think I like the look of it with just 3 stitches. So I'm going to move it across. That's what I was mentioning. If you pull the string too tight, it'll look like this, and we do not want our star to get stuck in this weird position. So make sure that just sits nice and flat naturally, not too pulled tight, but also not too loose either. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make a few more stars, and I'll see you in a minute. So I've just finished my last little star over here, and I just wanted to show you the back to show you that it's not very pretty, but it doesn't matter because no one's really going to see this. Now to secure the threads, we want to tie a knot. So we're going to catch a tiny little bit of felt and make sure you can't see this stitch from the outside. And pull the knot, those bits out. Now that I have my knot, I'm going to work this thread just back through the felt so it stays nice and secure before I cut the ends. You can see that I can't see my needle or any thread on the outside. So let's pull that through. Try not to catch the point of that star, and cut it close to the felt, and that will keep that nice and secure. Now getting ready to make our twizzle rope, I have gone ahead and cut my yarn. I've used white and yellow. I have 1 strand of each, and I've cut that to around 180 centimeters, which I believe is 70 inches. So on one end, you're going to knot it together. I also want to point out that the measurements for the yarn and twizzle ropes in general are not an exact science. Generally speaking, the length of yarn used to create a twizzle rope is twice what it needs to be plus 20%. So I did work this out previously, and this will give me a nice necklace size. Of course, if you would like it a bit longer, make it longer or don't twist as tightly. If you want shorter, you can cut the yarn shorter and also twist a little bit tighter. So now I have my knot at the end of my long yarn. I'm going to take some tape and I'm going to tape this to a solid surface like a table or a windowsill. So you want to tape above the knot. Oh, this is not ideal, but I'm just going to stick it right to my tablecloth here. And then all you do is you twist. And you keep twisting, but the thing to know that when you have twisted it enough is that it will start to loop on itself. Can you see how that's already twisting and looping? That's because I've twisted that enough, and I know that that will create a good twizzle rope. You can see that I can also pull this really tight, or it can be much looser. I like to go somewhere in the middle, not too tight, not too loose. So that will also, that will affect the finished length of your twizzle rope. It's how tightly this has been done. Okay, I think I will continue on because this, I'm sure, is going to be very boring to watch, and I will see you before I finish this rope. If you're interested, a quick way to make this twizzle rope is to roll it between your thumb and your finger, pinch it, and keep rolling. You want to make sure it still is able to loop on itself as you keep twisting. And keep that twist in the same direction or you'll undo all of your work. Now that I've twisted all the way to the end of this twizzle rope, what I need to do is bring this part of my twizzle, you can see that it's already tangled up, that doesn't matter at this point. So I'm going to pinch it together with the other end. Now this is the point where I can stretch this out. So you find the middle and then stretch them out together and then let them go. You can smooth out your rope just by gently pulling it and smoothing as you go. Now that that is nice and straight, I'm going to find the knot from my original twizzle rope, there it is, and I'm going to knot them together in the same spot. Well, I'm going to try anyway. Okay, find where that knot is, and there we go. So that's one end done. As you will see, there are now tassels on this side, but nothing on this side. So to fix that, I'm going to add some tassels, which is quite a simple process. We just take two pieces of the yarn that we've used, and this little bottom part here, I want to untwist it. There we go. Once you find this little loop, you can insert both pieces and bring it to the middle, and then we tie a knot. Okay, just make sure the end of your twizzle is sitting fine, and you'll notice our knot's kind of not sitting the same as the other. So to fix that, we just tie a knot like we did before. Now try to position it at the end of the twizzle and onto these pieces of yarn here. So you're not knotting the twizzle, but more you're knotting the yarn. I think I got a bit of twizzle, that's okay. At this point, we just want to make sure all of these pieces are the same length. So sit them next to each other and cut them straight. So now our twizzle piece is done. At this point, we want to blanket stitch around our little opening in the front star. So I've gone ahead and attached my embroidery thread, the gold color, to my needle, and I'm going to attach the thread the same way that I did before. So first I'm going to go under that little piece of felt and bring it almost to the edge of the of the thread. I'm going to hold that so it doesn't move. Create a little knot by catching some of the felt, but not on this side. So I have my knot, and I can go ahead and give that a little trim so it sits flush against that felt. I'm careful not to cut any of my string there. So now let's begin our blanket stitch. I do have a tutorial on how to do a blanket stitch, but I find this is pretty easy. Let's start from this side. I'm going to go down into the fabric. And as I do that, I want to catch a little bit of, there we go. I'm going to catch that loop. So which way shall I go? It's going to be easier. Let's go this way. I'll bring that back through the loop to the front. Down into the fabric. And I'm going to bring that back through this loop. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go all the way around, and I'll see you in a moment. I've just finished the last stitch of my blanket stitch, so now I'm just simply going to bring the thread through to the back. And I'm going to create a little knot over here, which is probably right next to the first knot I created. Oh, hello. Don't lick. Don't stop licking me. Stop it. This is Mary. She likes to help. And I've just worked the needle under a small layer of felt there, and you can't see it on the other side. That's how I bury my ends to keep them nice and secure. And let's cut that close to the felt, but not cutting the felt. So that's the inside, and this is the outside, and I have my little edge or opening all blanket stitched and ready to go. Now I still need to keep my embroidery thread. I don't need this just yet. Okay, you can sit there. Don't mind Mary. So now we're going to attach our twizzle rope. We need to attach the first one here, and then we're going to start our blanket stitch. We will attach the second one over here when we get to it. So it's important to note here that we want the rope sticking out from the top of the star and the tassels sticking out from the bottom. So let's go ahead and attach our thread to this position here. I like to call this point number 2. If we looked at the top, this would be point 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So at point 2, that's where I like to start the blanket stitch. So again, I've come through. You can't see it on the other side, but you can see a piece of felt. So let's create a little knot by catching some of the felt, not all of it, so it shows on the outside. Well, that's going to be all twisty. I'm going to just undo that bit because I have a lot of trouble undoing knots. I'd rather just undo that bit. Okay. Now let's knot that, and I can let go of this piece here and snip it close to the felt. Now that I've attached my embroidery thread, it's time to attach my twizzle. Like I said, we want our tassels poking down the top and the rope, no, the tassels poking down the bottom and the rope poking out the top. So I'm going to attach this by stitching through the knot. I've got my needle going through just a thin layer of felt. You can't see it on this side, but it's going to attach this twizzle rope to the top here. So let's go ahead and create quite a few little stitches here to hold this in place because we don't want this coming out. Just keep flicking back and making sure you're connecting that properly, but also it's not showing on the other side. Now that my little tassel is securely attached, I'm going to take the top part of my star and start blanket stitching around the edges. First, I'm going to take some pins and pin this in place because that's going to make it much easier for me to blanket stitch if nothing moves. You might just want to pin in your other piece of twizzle here so you know, well, so you don't forget it when you come to it. Though you may need to go through both pieces of felt to do that. I like to bring my thread on this side of the tassels. So inside, I'm just going to work it to a position through the felt where I can start blanket stitching. So as you pull this, just be careful you don't catch any tassels or any of your twizzle rope on this side. Now that might be easier if I remove that one, so I can poke this in a little bit better. So I want the edges to come together. Now let's start blanket stitching. So keep that out of the way, and we're going to do just like this. So I'm blanket stitching as close as I can to these little tassels. And then I'm going to just slip my needle sort of to this position at the back here, because I don't want a piece of thread coming across the front. I'd rather that little stitch sit at the back. Now at this point you want to pull the tassels as far as you can on this side before you push the needle through and create your blanket stitch again. So pull that one tight, and now your tassel should be nice and secure in that position. So we can continue around the star. Now at the top, I'm making sure I'm catching just the felt and not the twizzle rope underneath. And again, we want to get as close as we can to that little twizzle before we move it to the other side. Just don't get your thread tangled here. And again, I'm going to create one little stitch through the felt to bring my needle to the other side here. And then let's pull gently to remove that and catch the felt as close as we can to that twizzle rope. And as you can see, the twizzle rope is now just in between those tiny little stitches there. So now I can continue until I get to the next twizzle rope. So now I'm approaching the part where my second twizzle needs to attach. So I'm going to make sure it's sitting nicely in there before I get to it, so I can just see the position and how far I have to go in a second. So let's just continue this last little bit of blanket stitch. So now I am at the position where I would like to attach my twizzle. So I've gently pulled this and I'm going to bring the needle through the felt at the back. So I'm going to bring the needle through the felt at the back here. I'm trying very much to not pull this stitch open here because I don't want that looking loose. So once I've made that stitch, pull it tight to keep this one tight, and then start your little stitches to hold this in place. Now at this point you can relax a little more. Maybe we can even undo that. I'm trying to keep this section here together. I don't want to pull that apart. So now let's attach our twizzle as we did with our first twizzle by stitching the knot to the back piece of the felt without making any stitches visible on this side. Now that's going to be visible. Let's try that again. How about that? that's better. So I have just finished attaching the twizzle knot into the position. Now let's pinch that felt together and pull your twizzle. We've already blanket stitched on this side. Now we're pulling the twizzle over a bit so we can continue our blanket stitch on this side. Now make sure you grab the felt and not the twizzle. And pull that one tight to keep everything nice and secure. Now we can relax and continue our blanket stitch until we come to the bottom where we fix the tassels. Maybe one more stitch. Now at this point, I'm going to, from the back again, bring my needle through the felt to the back and pull the tassels to the side, and then we begin our blanket stitch again. What have I done? Crazy things. There we go. And I can relax again and try not to get tassels and continue the blanket stitch. So now we've just come to the very last stitch. What I like to do is go over that last stitch just so everything joins up nicely. And then I'm going to create my knot. Okay, knot has been created, and to bury my threads, I'm going to come under this fabric here in the felt. Definitely make sure you can't see this from the other side because you don't want to create any stitches. We're just burying the ends here. Give that a little pull so it's nice and taut, and snip it. So now our little StarKeeper star is finished, ready for the baby. So let's get on to making that. So now we're going to make our little baby. What we need is our scrap fabric, our scrap doll fabric. We're going to fold that in half, take our little pattern piece, and I'm going to line up the edge where it says cut on the fold, Once I have done that, we'll pin this in place so everything stays where it's meant to while we cut around it. So let's cut this now. And I didn't do a great job, so I'm just going to tidy that up a bit. Okay. Now I'll just get rid of these bits. So I don't need this piece anymore. But on your pattern, you will notice at the top that it's marked a section to leave open. This section just here. So on my pattern, on my piece here, that means this section just here. So when I get to about there from my stitching, because I'm going to attach my thread here and back stitch up this seam, that is the position that I stop. So let's keep this together. Just pin that like that. And I have already attached a very long piece of thread to this needle. Now I have attached with a knot the thread at this bottom corner here. So now I'm going to create a back stitch with a very tiny, possibly 1 to 2 millimeter seam up this curved edge and stop just here. So now I just finished this last stitch at the top. Remember, I have left this section here open. I'm going to remove my pin, but I also want to flip over and check my stitching. First, I will check the side that I started with and check that all of the stitching is not close to the edge. Flip to the other side and check. I can see things got a little bit questionable here, so I'm going to work my needle back to this point and re-stitch this area. Once I have done that, I'm going to work the needle and the thread back down here. Once it's here, we don't want to cut the thread. We're just going to leave it there. So just be careful when you're working from that point onwards, because the needle is a little bit unforgiving sometimes. Now I'm going to take my wool roving and my chopstick, and I'm going to create a little ball for the head. Kind of. That's probably a bit too much. Let's try that much. And I'm going to push it into this tiny little hole. This may take a moment or a few attempts. I find if you twist as you push, it tends to grab the wool much better than if you just try to poke it, and that tends to go through the wool, which is not what you want. Oh, I forgot one little thing here. At the top, we're going to take a pin and just pin this section closed, because we don't want this stuffing to be pushed out of the top there. And we want to create a nice firm little head so that he has good shape. Okay, now take a little bit more wool roving, probably a little bit bigger than the piece that you put in for the head. And now we're going to push it in again in the little body section. Ouch. Try to keep your thread out of the way. It doesn't matter if you end up tucking the ends in, just as long as the working thread doesn't get caught up in this wool here. Now in this section, you want to stuff as much wool as you are able to get in there. Be careful of that pin, because ow, it does hurt. Okay, now that I've got that in there, I'm going to use the thread, the needle and thread that's already here, and create a running stitch around this little area here. So a running stitch is simply that. We just do big straight stitches like this and pull that through. And now we're at the beginning again. We're just going to make sure all of that is in and gently pull this closed. Now to secure that, just pinch it tightly, and we'll do a couple of little stitches to try to hold those threads in place without them coming loose. And we want to tie a knot so it doesn't come undone. I'm just going to take another needle so I can get rid of these little ends here before we do this part. That's not a little needle, that's a giant needle. Never mind. So let's just push it through the body and come out in the body, not on the head section. Pull that tight and give it a snip. And put that needle away. Now we're going to spend a little bit of time flattening this area. Now I like to do this by creating kind of like ladder stitches. So I might grab a bit of fabric from this side and bring it over to this side. And I'm going to push that down as I do it. Now let's grab from here, over on this side, and back on this side. Okay, so now we have this little section that looks a bit better. Actually, I want to get rid of that little bump there. So to do that, let's grab it. Let's see if I can just bring it over here. That's better. Okay, so now the little body part is done. So let's do a little knot just to keep things nice and secure. And I'm going to work this up to this point of the neck here. Okay, here I am at the neck, and I'm just going to wrap my thread around and gently pull tight. If you're using cotton, it's more likely to break than a polyester thread. So if you're using cotton, extra care. Okay, 3 or 4 times to give you a little defined neck. Now let's secure this by threading through to this raw edges in the back here. Oh, it doesn't want to come through. Just knot that there. So everything stays where it's meant to. Okay, now I have a little head and a little body. I'm going to work my thread up to this section here. Normally when doll makers leave this section open, it's so that if you have created any wrinkles around your neck, you can pull this section tight to reduce those wrinkles down. So it's unlikely you would have created any wrinkles in this tiny little baby, but just in case, I thought I'd leave that there for anyone who needs it. So we're going to close this gap by creating a running stitch, just like we did around the bottom. Okay, 4 stitches around. So we pull it tight, and we want to secure this as far back as we can. Now, when you've pulled it tight, pinch it so you don't lose that tension, and then you can tie your knot. So now that I have my head, this little gap closed, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time flattening it out like we did on the bottom. So again, I'm just going to take a piece from this side and a piece from this side, and just keep doing that to help flatten this section down. Now what I want to do is I want to finish these edges a little bit. You can do this by creating a whip stitch or a ladder stitch over this. I prefer the ladder stitch. I feel it contains things a little bit better. So to make a ladder stitch, we're just creating little horizontal lines or stitches on either side of this little raw edge here. Now I'm at the bottom. This is what my seam looks like here. And I'm going to just secure this with a little knot and bury my threads so it's all nice and secure. So bury my threads just means do this before I cut them. Okay, now our little baby looks a little bit like a seahorse. Now it's time to mark the position of the eyes. So let's be mindful this is the back. We want that pointing towards the back. So that tells us that this is the front. I'm going to use my air erasable pen. If you don't have one of these, a simple pencil, if you use it very lightly, will do the same thing. So we're just going to mark our eye position. I didn't do a great job of that. Okay, and our mouth position. So there's my eye position and my mouth position. I have a single thread of embroidery thread attached to this needle, and I'm going to anchor it at the back first. Let's tie a knot here so it doesn't get lost. And we'll just snip that part so it sinks inside the doll skin. So we have it attached at the back here with a little knot. I'm going to bring from this position to the point where the eye is. Now this first stitch is more to anchor the eye to the head. So just pull it ever so gently back a little bit. Now we're going to repeat that stitch one more time, and you want the stitch to sit just above where that first one was. So watching carefully that it sits in the same position. Pull gently because we don't want any knots here. So you can decide if you would like a bigger eye than this or if that's okay. I actually think I might add another one, another little stitch. I might do this one maybe above where I did that. And I'll see how that looks. And I might add one more. Now I'm very mindful to get these stitches in the same spot as they were originally. Okay, so that's 4 little stitches for that one eye. Now let's get the other eye done. Remember, the first one is to just create this position and anchor the eye to the head. So pull that back a little bit. Now we're going to go back and make that stitch a little bit bigger. And I think I'm going to do some stitches underneath that one this time. As if you remember, my lines that I created were not quite even. One was slightly high and one was slightly low. I think that little face is fine. I'm thinking we might need one more stitch on this side though, so I might go ahead and do that. And that looks a bit more even. Okay, so once you're happy with your eyes, knot this off and sink the thread ends into the back of the head or the body. So knot, and let's do it like that. Then we can cut this little section just there. So the back of the head's not particularly pretty, but the front is pretty cute. So let's change our thread for the mouth color. So anchor your thread as we did before by coming through the back of the head and tying the knot here and then snipping the excess thread. This is for the mouth color. So we go to the position of the mouth. I like to start from the left side and then work across to the right. So I have a single strand of embroidery thread that I'm working with. We give that a little pull, just a gentle one. And again, we do one more stitch over the top of this in the same spot. So just watch where your needle and thread came out from and where it needs to go into to get it into the same spot. And that's it for the little mouth. So we tie this at the back again before we sink the threads. And let's sink those through here. And snip that nice and close. So that's little baby is ready for some clothes. Now it's time to get our little cotton velour ready. As you can tell, I'm working with scraps here, which is perfect for this little project. So I know I need one little hat. The thing about velour is it loves to curl up on itself and make things difficult for me. Okay, so pin this straight. Notice the direction of the grain in the fabric. And we only need one of these, so I'm going to cut this out now. Now this little piece here, we do need 2 of them, but we need to be mindful of the direction of the fabric because I don't want to cut one up this way because then I'd have one upside down to the other piece. But I can, if I notice the direction of the grain goes this way, I can fold sideways. And then I can cut my little piece on this side just one time through both pieces of fabric, and that will give me two pieces that are running in the same direction. Okay, there is my little body piece and my little hat. So I've attached some embroidery thread already. Now I have two pieces of my embroidery thread. Let's remove the pattern piece. Now for the little hat, we want the right side, the fluffy side, facing in, and we're going to create this little shape here. And use your pen to hold these pieces together. Now I have my little hat piece pinned together. I'm going to stitch this section here. So I'm going to grab one corner and then the other, so it will help me line them up a bit. Now let's make a little knot. Before we start. Now we are going to create a back stitch, just like we did earlier on our little head piece. So the back stitch goes along here, then along to the point up here. I'm going to continue this back stitch right up to this point, and I'll see you in a minute. So I've just finished my back stitch and I'm all the way at the very top. Now what I want to do is bring my thread back down to this position, and to do that I'm going to create a little whip stitch over the top of this back stitch here. Okay, so our whip stitch is now done. Now remove your pin and grab your little chopstick again. We're going to turn this the right way out. And your chopstick is used just to push this little pointed hat out. Now these little raw edges, you just want to turn them over a couple of millimeters and pinch a little as you work along the edge. That's just to help hold the fabric in place when you put the baby there. So now let's take our little baby and we position the hat so it sits around the face. And we take two little pins, and be careful because it hurts when you stab into yourself. We're just going to tuck that beside the head. Now you can review this position. You might like that a little down a bit more, and use pins to hold it in the position where you want it. Just be careful it doesn't go over your eyes like mine has just now. So when you're happy with your positioning there, you're going to work your thread that's still attached. Just go through the body, and you want to bring it out just beside, or just close to the neck, but not above this line here. Ouch. Pull that through. Now let's bring it up just really close to this neck now. Okay, now I've caught that little edge there. At this point, what I'm wanting to do is to hold this in position with my pins and my fingers, and I'm going to create a whip stitch around the edge of the face and the fabric. So my fabric wants to keep coming forward, so I'm going to be very mindful of that as I stitch. So the goal is to create tiny little stitches into the hat and the face. Pull them tight so they disappear into that fluffy fabric. you can remove the pins as you get to them. Okay, I'm going to continue until I get to this point here. Now let's remove that last pin. Now with my thread from the side here, I'm going to grab a bit of fabric from this side and also a bit of the fabric from the other side, because I want to stretch it so it comes across and around the body. So you can see that I'm just grabbing fabric, I'm not grabbing the body skin underneath. We're just pulling it. So your body fabric may stretch around here, or you may be left with a little gap. It doesn't really matter. We're just making this nice and snug and secure over the body. I think that's probably all that I can do here. So I'm just going to create another little whip stitch around the bottom here. This one doesn't need to be pretty, just purely to hold this in place. Okay, that little baby is finished at this point. So we're just going to get rid of these little ends. Where are those snips? I've lost them. And I'm going to get rid of these thread ends here before we go on to the last little part, which is making the clothes for the body. Okay. So our little baby now can just go and wait here for his clothes. Carefully so it doesn't move too much. You want to take off that pattern piece and pin this back together. Oh, that mustn't have been recording. What I had started to do is I attached my thread at the top right hand corner here, and now I'm creating a whip stitch joining these two pieces together. So I'm going to continue this until we get all around this curved section, and I'm leaving that straight section at the top open. That's so I can put the little baby inside. I'm not too worried that I've just caught that edge, the ends of those threads there, because they're going to tuck inside here anyway. So that's probably a good thing, and now they're out of my way. So here we are at the top left corner now. If I were to look like this as I started from, sorry, rather this way. Now I'm at the top left. And now what I want to do, I'm going to remove that pin. I'm going to create a back stitch, but this time I'm going to make sure it's on the inside of that whip stitch. So I want all of the whip stitches to stay on the outside part of the back stitch that I'm creating now. Okay, so I'm going to keep going until I have gone around the curved edge where I just have created my whip stitch, and that will bring me back to the starting position of the top right corner. So I've just finished the back stitch and I've stitched all around the edges, and I'm back to where I started from. Now what we're going to do is turn this inside out. Now this is the tricky part. So I like to open this section here, use my chopstick to push it on top, and then push that through the opening and pull it down. Push the chopstick through to help push out those edges. Now we've got to get our little baby into that little hole, which may seem impossible, but with a little persistence and determination, it can be done. Push that section open a little bit with your thumb to create some room. Push the baby onto the bottom part and then squeeze and pinch and push and maybe not cry, but just generally give things a wiggle and a push and work it up. Okay, so I think we have got our little baby into the bag. Make sure the side seams line up with the side of the head. At this point, now we're going to take the embroidery thread and we're going to ladder stitch around the top edge of that opening we just made and the head of the baby. You probably see some raw edges. We do want to tuck those over. If you can't tuck them at this point, we're going to do it while we ladder stitch. Grab the fabric from the head, and then you want to grab just a little bit below the raw edge, the fabric on the baby bodysuit. Head fabric and this section here. So as we create this, we do want to try to tuck these little edges in to encourage those raw edges to hide inside. Now we do want to go around a second time just to make sure this is nice and secure, and it's not going to come off through lots of vigorous play. So the second time around I try to make my stitches a little smaller. So now we're back to the starting position. Here I'm going to create a knot, and let's sink that through the body to hold that securely. Pull tight before you snip. And here is our little baby. Now we might do one more finishing touch. So here I have a scrap piece of doll skin that I use, and a beeswax crayon, and I'm just going to rub some of the crayon onto this fabric. I'm going to fold it to create a little point, and then really gently I'm going to give our little baby some tiny little rosy cheeks. Now this does wear off through play, so you might want to keep this handy and you can reapply that later. Now let's put our little baby into his little home. Now it is a bit of a snug fit, and that's intentional so that the baby doesn't get lost. And here is our little star baby. Thank you so much for creating with me again today. And remember, I would really love to see your little creations of your StarKeepers. If you'd like to send them to me, you can contact me on Instagram or here on YouTube in the community section. So thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching, and if you found this video helpful, show your support by giving it a like. And if you'd like to stay updated with all of my new tutorials, please subscribe.